This is the world that you know.
We do have breaking news tonight playing out in American history as we come on the air.
The number of
Deeply divided moment.
I am very confused when it comes to the future.
Officially declaring a national emergency.
We're 20 years from the fucking Matrix, and we're seeing it happen.
The flood of hard-to-imagine things that have happened in this have left many in disbelief and led many to ask the question, are we living in a real world or a sinister Matrix-like simulation? To tackle the question, are we in a based reality or simulation? First, we need to understand the concept of what is a simulation and its theory.
40 years ago, we had Pong, like two rectangles and a dot. Now, 40 years later, we have photorealistic 3D simulations with millions of people playing simultaneously, and it's getting better every year. If you assume any rate of improvement at all, then the games will become indistinguishable from reality. It seems to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines simulation as imitative representation of one system or process by means of the functioning of another. Also, another meaning of the word is derived here as sham or counterfeit or not real. This interpretation of simulation gets deeply philosophical and takes us back thousands of years, as many ancient religions and cultures. Even ancient Western philosophy dabbled into these concepts. Plato, for once, suggested that if people grew in caves and only see shadows of other people on the walls, once freed from the caves, a man who sees the reality of the world cannot come back to the cave and see it with the same vision as before. But if we come back to the modern world and start talking in scientific terms, what it means to be living in a simulation. Are there any examples in front of us, though, whom we can explain the concept of simulation? Yes. We as humans have always tried to simulate our imagination through stories. First painted on cave walls, told around campfires, later explained in text, and then presented on screen. And then arrived the form of storytelling that makes the audience a part of its narrative, creating a new reality, i.e., video games. Within a few decades, we have gone from this to this. The multiplayer games of today are played by millions around the world, at one time with hyper-realistic imagery. And soon as the powers of the computer servers grow and the advancement of VR and AR, a participant in the game would not be able to tell the difference between the quote and unquote real world, or the created or simulated world of these games. The gaming world is very close to giving each of us a more real than reality, immersive and simulated world of our own. This inquisition to find the reality of being has been going on for ages and probably will continue for more to come. And one such inquisition presented by scientists and philosophers is the simulation theory.
Imagine a day where you can simulate a world so perfectly with life forms, humans, so well that you can recreate every single neurosynaptic thought you could have, but now you're in the simulation on the computer.
The simulation theory or hypothesis suggests that this universe we know could very well be an artificial simulation, such as a computer simulation. This theory has been popularized in its modern form by the philosopher Nick Bostrom, and many scientists are programming scientific tests to verify or prove this theory. If we indulge ourselves in this theory and imagine when the interactive video games achieve the hyper-realistic standard, creating worlds exact replicas of the world we know, it might get very hard for someone born, say 100 years from now, to differentiate between the immersive VR worlds of the games to the world we know as real. Here, the work of Dr. Nick Bostrom comes into play. In his long paper arguing in favor of the simulation hypothesis, Nick Bostrom presents 3 possible scenarios. 1. Only a fraction of the human race, closer to 0, reaches the post-human stage, a scenario likely caused by natural phenomenon. 2. The fraction of humans interested in creating their simulated self in a post-human civilization is close to 0. Or 3. The fraction of all people with our kind of experiences that are living in a simulation is very close to 1. And when you add in the factor that in future AI will likely change to AGI, self-teaching, and self-improving AI systems, it can create millions of simulations on one basic reality.
If you look at the world as a whole, by the end of time, as it were, you just count it up, there would be more simulated ones than non-simulated ones.
So, if in the future, technological systems can create millions of realities such as augmented or virtual realities based on one reality, it will be virtually impossible the base reality for all these simulations. And if we pull back and apply the same principle to the world as we know it, the possibility that one is one of many simulations of some higher layer becomes stronger. Now, this may sound doom and gloom, but some thinkers argue that this is better if we can prove that we are in a simulation. This way may never hit the inevitable ceiling of growth of human civilization and create many self-replicating versions of our reality. Now, before we dismiss it as sci-fi mumbo-jumbo, it is important to look back in time and realize how humans first believed the solar system worked. The brightest minds once believed that Earth was the center of the universe until Galileo corrected them, a whole 2,000 years after the similar hypothesis of Aristarchus of Samos. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that Nick Bostrom and other simulation theorists are Galileo, or at least Aristarchus of today. Now, this theory is either right or wrong. That is, there are either no simulations or there are many on one base reality. And if applied the mathematical theory of indifference, since there are no certain proofs to qualify either, the chances for both possibilities are equal 50-50. And scientists are taking steps further required to prove or disprove the simulation theory. Just like we know that all the life forms on Earth function in the laws of science determined through many mathematical constants. So, theoretically, it isn't out of the question to simulate the universe through a computer, granted that it holds the power to run such a vast operation. And if you continue on this thought of action, you can presume that, like any computer, the one running the simulation that we're in will also gather bugs over time, causing glitches in the system. So if through experiments, if the scientists can find glitches, the measured glitches can then serve to prove that the world we know as reality is, in fact, a simulation created by some higher form. One of the ways we can find these glitches is through the basic laws by which the universe works. So, if the simulation gathers bugs over time, the simulators would try and correct them by changing the constants in the laws of nature. The problem with measuring these changes is that they would be so tiny that it might be hard to observe them. As we know, these constraints in the laws of nature have remained unchanged for decades to the millionth part. However, as we gain more accuracy in measuring these constraints over many decades, slight changes could be observed. Another test relies on the idea that a computer running the simulation, no matter how powerful, will have a cap, and it might be running the simulation consisted of tiny units, which might be observable at subatomic levels. While others are trying to study cosmic rays as visible light that possibly has energies varying in different directions. But these rays can only come near the Earth's radius once in 100 years, so that testing might take some time. And it's not that this theory isn't without skeptics. Many scientists believe that this theory falls on its face as we are still not at the point where we can simulate ourselves, so there is no chance that a simulator will simulate an ancient civilization. This argument relies heavily on judging the preferences of civilization we know nothing about. Some scientists believe that a civilization living in a simulation can generate a simulation of itself, creating layers of simulations. Each has to be less complex than the previous one, as the upper layers would be responsible for computing itself and the layers below it. Hence, the system will hit the ceiling and will stop at a civilization that cannot simulate further. So there's a chance that we might be the innermost layer of this complex multiverse onion, and the year that we've had has only increased the curiosity of the people about this question. Are we in a simulation? It is getting harder for people to believe that all of these unbelievable events can happen just in 1 year, with no controlling force behind it. Many scientists and researchers are of a belief that if the progress in technology continues this way, we might be able to simulate our entire universe, or the knowledge of it, into a simulation. To save computing power, we might simulate everything in 2D and then project them in 3D much like holograms. So much so that by a combination of AI and increasing video projection technologies like AR and VR, we might be able to produce a world of our thought as we think it through synaptic signaling. If or when we can create such a powerful computer, it might require to be set up on a planet of its own, with access to a super energy source like the sun. And when we're there, it will be up to the collective human conscious to decide whether to create a simulation in our image. One thing that we may then understand is the question that all civilizations have asked since the dawn of time. What is it? In whose image are we created?
Boot up the next simulation.